HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Innovator's Dilemma, When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail, by Clayton M. Christensen. Read by L.J. Ganser. Preface. In 1990, I began asking the two questions that would eventually help shape this book. First, why is success so difficult to sustain? And second, is successful innovation really as unpredictable as the data suggests? By that time, I'd been a strategist at the Boston Consulting Group, where I'd had unusual opportunities to see at every level how companies competed, and I had co-founded CPS Technologies to commercialize advanced materials technology developed in MIT labs. But neither career path had yet to fully answer those two questions that were keeping me up at night. So, at 38, with the support of my wife, and months before our fifth child was born, I became a doctoral student and made those questions my life's work. I'm happy to say I got the answer to the first, and with the continued help of tremendous colleagues drawn to the subject over the last 2 decades, I'm still homing in on the second. In this new edition of The Innovator's Dilemma, I'll show you some of the exciting new research we've conducted since the book was first published 2 decades ago. Why is success so difficult to sustain? This was and still is an important question, because when you look across the sweep of business history, most companies that once seemed successful, the best practitioners of best practice, were in the middle of the pack, or worse, the back of it, a decade or two later. And we discovered something unsettling and counterintuitive. What often causes this lagging behind are 2 principles of good management taught in business schools: that you should always listen to and respond to the needs of your best customers, and that you should focus investments on those innovations that promise the highest returns. But these 2 principles, in practice, actually sow the seeds of every successful company's ultimate demise. That's why we call it the innovator's dilemma. Doing the right thing is the wrong thing. This dilemma rears its head when a type of innovation that we've termed disruptive technology arises at the low end of the market, in the simplest, most unassuming applications. Explaining this paradox is the purpose of this book. Incidentally, another scholar who subsequently joined me in the study of this phenomenon, Michael Rayner of Deloitte Research, has noted that disruptive technology is probably the cause behind the creative destruction that economist Joseph Schumpeter observed to be the primary engine of economic progress more than half a century ago. I think Michael is right. And what about that second question, the one about successful innovation really being as unpredictable as the data suggests? Here's an illustration that I think helps show what I mean. All venture capitalists convince themselves, to various degrees, that the companies they're investing in will succeed. Otherwise, they wouldn't invest in them in the first place, right? But they are correct in only 10 to 20% of the investments they make. So they have structured their whole industry on hedging their bets against the alleged unpredictability of innovation. The amounts of their financial commitments, for example, vary greatly, depending on statistical assessments of the risks involved. The track record of innovators inside established companies is roughly the same. But think about it. If we could determine that innovation is inherently unpredictable, and not just a risk to manage like venture capitalists do, then it would lead us down a very different path. And research done by my colleagues and me seems to be indicating that this is in fact the case. For example, before World War II, if you were in the business of drilling for oil, 90% of the wells you drilled would be dry. Just like venture capitalists, your instincts told you there might be oil in those places, but you spent 90% of your working life drilling dry holes. In the subsequent 75 years, however, geological researchers have developed theories that tell them what data to seek about structures deep in the earth, and those theories help them give meaning to that data. Now they can predict with much more accuracy whether oil is present before they start drilling. There's no guaranteed guide to oil drilling yet, but today, over 60% of the wells drilled strike oil. Today, my colleagues and I are striving to bring to innovators, entrepreneurs, and the people who invest in them the same kinds of useful theories that those geologists brought to oil drilling. We want to help them know which pieces of information they need to collect and how to interpret that information so that they can become predictably successful at a rate that wasn't possible in the past. And I'm thrilled to report that since this book was first published, we have made substantial progress with these theories. It might seem audacious to assert that hard-headed, data-driven, results-oriented managers can benefit from using theories. Indeed, the terms theory and theoretical connote impractical in modern business speak. But theories are statements of cause and effect, which actions yield which results and why. As such, a good theory is consummately practical. The truth is, every time managers take an action or make a plan, they do it with the belief that if they take the actions they envision, they'll get the results they need. So managers are in fact voracious consumers of theory. The problem, the reason why succeeding at innovation has seemed so unpredictable, is that researchers to date haven't provided a body of theory that is valid and reliable enough to give innovators a solid sense of whether there is oil down there before they start drilling. Some who have read this book have been bothered that the examples I used to illustrate the effects of disruption are all drawn from the past. But perhaps that's because those readers have been misled as to what theory actually is and how it is built. Let me explain. Data only exists about the past. Theory must be derived, therefore, from careful observation of the past, then by categorizing those observations and correlating those categories with the outcomes of interest. Then, by understanding what causes those outcomes, and finally by showing how that causal mechanism can produce different results in different circumstances. Theory is then improved by using it to predict, retrospectively to predict what should have happened in the past, and prospectively to predict what will happen in the future. That being said, the theory of disruption continues to yield predictions that are quite accurate in an astounding range of industries and applications, from satellites and national defense to computers and telecommunications, from retailing software to national economic development, and from healthcare to education. Hundreds of students, consultants, investors, executives, and academics have joined with me to continue testing the theory of disruption and to research the problems of innovation. In many ways, this book has become a common platform of understanding upon which we have gathered, and I'm incapable of expressing how grateful I am for all they have taught me since the first publication of this book. I can think of no professional pursuit more rewarding than joining with such kind, selfless, and intelligent people in the pursuit of light and truth. Countless articles and books have been written on this shared platform. I invite you to dig into this body of work, some of which is listed under my name on the Harvard Business School website. In doing so, I hope you will notice that The Innovator's Dilemma, published 2 decades ago, is the last piece for which I was the sole author. All subsequent scholarship has been with dozens of wonderful colleagues, a tribute to how greatly so many people have contributed to this body of understanding we have been working to build. The great historian of science, Thomas Kuhn, taught us that the key to improving any theory is to surface anomalies, events or phenomena that the theory cannot explain. It is only by seeking to account for outliers, exceptions to the theory, that researchers can improve the theory. That's why I need you to join me as a researcher. After you've read this book, put the theory of disruption on like a set of lenses and search for things in your past and present experience for which the theory cannot yet account. Then let me know about the anomalies so that we can get to work improving the theory to resolve them. Clayton M. Christensen, Kim B. Clark, Professor of Business Administration, Harvard Business School. Introduction. This book is about the failure of companies to stay atop their industries when they confront certain types of market and technological change. It's not about the failure of simply any company, but of good companies, the kinds that many managers have admired and tried to emulate, the companies known for their abilities to innovate and execute. Companies stumble for many reasons, of course, among them bureaucracy, arrogance, tired executive blood, poor planning, short-term investment horizons, inadequate skills and resources, and just plain bad luck. But this book is not about companies with such weaknesses. It is about well-managed companies that have their competitive antennae up, listen astutely to their customers, invest aggressively in new technologies, and yet still lose market dominance. Such seemingly unaccountable failures happen in industries that move fast and in those that move slow, in those built on electronics technology and those built on chemical and mechanical technology, in manufacturing and in service industries. Sears Roebuck, for example, was regarded for decades as one of the most astutely managed retailers in the world. At its zenith, Sears accounted for more than 2% of all retail sales in the United States. It pioneered several innovations critical to the success of today's most admired retailers. For example, supply chain management, store brands, catalog retailing, and credit card sales. The esteem in which Sears management was held shows in this 1964 excerpt from Fortune. How did Sears do it? In a way, the most arresting aspect of its story is that there was no gimmick. Sears opened no big bag of tricks, shot off no skyrockets. Instead, it looked as though everybody in its organization simply did the right thing, easily and naturally. And their cumulative effect was to create an extraordinary powerhouse of a company. Yet no one speaks about Sears that way today. Somehow, it completely missed the advent of discount retailing and home centers. In the midst of today's catalog retailing boom, Sears has been driven from that business. Indeed, the very viability of its retailing operations has been questioned. One commentator has noted that Sears Merchandise Group lost $1.3 billion in 1992, even before a $1.7 billion restructuring charge. Sears let arrogance blind it to basic changes taking place in the American marketplace. Another writer has complained, Sears has been a disappointment for investors who have watched its stock sink dismally in the face of unkept promises of a turnaround. Sears' old merchandising approach, a vast, middle-of-the-road array of mid-priced goods and services, is no longer competitive. No question, the constant disappointments, the repeated predictions of a turnaround that never seems to come, have reduced the credibility of Sears management in both the financial and merchandising communities. It is striking to note that Sears received its accolades at exactly the time, in the mid-1960s, when it was ignoring the rise of discount retailing and home centers, the lower-cost formats for marketing name-brand hard goods that ultimately stripped Sears of its core franchise. Sears was praised as one of the best-managed companies in the world at the very time it let Visa and MasterCard usurp the enormous lead it had established in the use of credit cards in retailing. In some industries, this pattern of leadership failure has been repeated more than once. Consider the computer industry. IBM dominated the mainframe market, but missed by years the emergence of mini-computers, which were technologically much simpler than mainframes. In fact, no other major manufacturer of mainframe computers became a significant player in the mini-computer business. Digital Equipment Corporation created the mini-computer market and was joined by a set of other aggressively managed companies, Data General, Prime, Wang, Hewlett-Packard, and Nixdorf. But each of these companies in turn missed the desktop personal computer market. It was left to Apple Computer, together with Commodore, Tandy, and IBM's standalone PC division, to create the personal computing market. Apple, in particular, was uniquely innovative in establishing the standard for user-friendly computing. But Apple and IBM lagged 5 years behind the leaders in bringing portable computers to market. Similarly, the firms that built the engineering workstation market, Apollo, Sun, and Silicon Graphics, were all newcomers to the industry. As in retailing, many of these leading computer manufacturers were at one time regarded as among the best-managed companies in the world, and were held up by journalists and scholars of management as examples for all to follow. Consider this assessment of Digital Equipment, made in 1986. Taking on Digital Equipment Corporation these days is like standing in front of a moving train. The $7.6 billion computer maker has been gathering speed, while most rivals are stalled in a slump in the computer industry. The author proceeded to warn IBM to watch out because it was standing on the tracks. Indeed, Digital was one of the most prominently featured companies in the McKinsey study that led to the book In Search of Excellence. Yet, a few years later, writers characterized DEC quite differently. Digital Equipment Corporation is a company in need of triage. Sales are drying up in its key mini-computer line. A 2-year-old restructuring plan has failed miserably. Forecasting and production planning systems have failed miserably. Cost-cutting hasn't come close to restoring profitability. But the real misfortune may be DEC's lost opportunities. It has squandered 2 years trying halfway measures to respond to the low-margin personal computers and workstations that have transformed the computer industry. In Digital's case, as in Sears, the very decisions that led to its decline were made at the time it was so widely regarded as being an astutely managed firm. It was praised as a paragon of managerial excellence at the very time it was ignoring the arrival of the desktop computers that besieged it a few years later. Sears and Digital are in noteworthy company. Xerox long dominated the market for plain paper photocopiers used in large, high-volume copying centers. Yet, it missed huge growth and profit opportunities in the market for small tabletop photocopiers, where it became only a minor player. Although steel mini-mills have now captured 40% of the North American steel market, including nearly all of the region's markets for bars, rods, and structural steel, not a single integrated steel company, American, Asian, or European, had by 1995 built a plant using mini-mill technology. Of the 30 manufacturers of cable-actuated power shovels, only 4 survived the industry's 25-year transition to hydraulic excavation technology. As we shall see, the list of leading companies that failed when confronted with disruptive changes in technology and market structure is a long one. At first glance, there seems to be no pattern in the changes that overtook them. In some cases, the new technologies swept through quickly. In others, the transition took decades. In some, the new technologies were complex and expensive to develop. In others, the deadly technologies were simple extensions of what the leading companies already did better than anyone else. One theme common to all of these failures, however, is that the decisions that led to failure were made when the leaders in question were widely regarded as among the best companies in the world. There are 2 ways to resolve this paradox. One might be to conclude that firms such as Digital, IBM, Apple, Sears, Xerox, and Bucyrus-Erie must never have been well managed. Maybe they were successful because of good luck and fortuitous timing, rather than good management. Maybe they finally fell on hard times because their good fortune ran out. Maybe. An alternative explanation, however, is that these failed firms were as well run as one could expect a firm managed by mortals to be, but that there is something about the way decisions get made in successful organizations that sows the seeds of eventual failure. The research reported in this book supports this latter view. It shows that in the cases of well-managed firms, such as those cited above, good management was the most powerful reason they failed to stay atop their industries. Precisely because these firms listened to their customers, invested aggressively in new technologies that would provide their customers more and better products of the sort they wanted, and because they carefully studied market trends and systematically allocated investment capital to innovations that promised the best returns, they lost their positions of leadership. What this implies at a deeper level is that many of what are now widely accepted principles of good management are in fact only situationally appropriate. There are times at which it is right not to listen to customers, right to invest in developing lower performance products that promise lower margins, and right to aggressively pursue small rather than substantial markets. This book derives a set of rules from carefully designed research and analysis of innovative successes and failures in the disk drive and other industries that managers can use to judge when the widely accepted principles of good management should be followed and when alternative principles are appropriate. These rules, which I call principles of disruptive innovation, show that when good companies fail, it often has been because their managers either ignored these principles or chose to fight them. Managers can be extraordinarily effective in managing even the most difficult innovations if they work to understand and harness the principles of disruptive innovation. As in many of life's most challenging endeavors, there is great value in coming to grips with the way the world works, and in managing innovative efforts in ways that accommodate such forces. The Innovator's Dilemma is intended to help a wide range of managers, consultants, and academics in manufacturing and service businesses, high-tech or low, in slowly evolving or rapidly changing environments. Given that aim, technology, as used in this book, means the processes by which an organization transforms labor, capital, materials, and information into products and services of greater value. All firms have technologies. A retailer like Sears employs a particular technology to procure, present, sell, and deliver products to its customers, while a discount warehouse retailer like Price Costco employs a different technology. This concept of technology therefore extends beyond engineering and manufacturing to encompass a range of marketing, investment, and managerial processes. Innovation refers to a change in one of these technologies. The Dilemma. To establish the theoretical depth of the ideas in this book, the breadth of their usefulness, and their applicability to the future as well as the past, I have divided this book into two parts. Part 1, chapters 1 through 4, builds a framework that explains why sound decisions by great managers can lead firms to failure. The picture these chapters paint is truly that of an innovator's dilemma. The logical, competent decisions of management that are critical to the success of their companies are also the reasons why they lose their positions of leadership. Part 2, chapters 5 through 10, works to resolve the dilemma. Building on our understanding of why and under what circumstances new technologies have caused great firms to fail, it prescribes managerial solutions to the dilemma, how executives can simultaneously do what is right for the near-term health of their established businesses while focusing adequate resources on the disruptive technologies that ultimately could lead to their downfall. Building a failure framework. I begin this book by digging deep before extending the discussion to draw general conclusions. The first two chapters recount in some detail the history of the disk drive industry, where the saga of good companies hitting hard times has been played out over and over again. This industry is an ideal field for studying failure because rich data about it exist, and because, in the words of Harvard Business School Dean Kim B. Clark, it is fast history. In just a few years, market segments, companies, and technologies have emerged, matured, and declined. Only twice, in the 6 times that new architectural technologies have emerged in this field, has the industry's dominant firm maintained its lead in the subsequent generation. This repetitive pattern of failure in the disk drive industry allowed me first to develop a preliminary framework that explained why the best and largest firms in the early generations of this industry failed, and then to test this framework across subsequent cycles in the industry's history to see whether it was robust enough to continue to explain failures among the industry's more recent leaders. Chapters 3 and 4 then deepen our understanding of why the leading firms stumbled repeatedly in the disk drive industry, and simultaneously test the breadth of the framework's usefulness by examining the failure of firms in industries with very different characteristics. Hence, Chapter 3, exploring the mechanical excavator industry, finds that the same factors that precipitated the failure of the leading disk drive makers also proved to be the undoing of the leading makers of mechanical excavators, in an industry that moves with a very different pace and technological intensity. Chapter 4 completes the framework and uses it to show why integrated steel companies worldwide, have proven so incapable of blunting the attacks of the mini-mill steel makers. Why good management can lead to failure. The failure framework is built upon three findings from this study. The first is that there is a strategically important distinction between what I call sustaining technologies and those that are disruptive. These concepts are very different from the incremental versus radical distinction that has characterized many studies of this problem. Second, the pace of technological progress can, and often does, outstrip what markets need. This means that the relevance and competitiveness of different technological approaches can change with respect to different markets over time. And third, customers and financial structures of successful companies color heavily the sorts of investments that appear to be attractive to them relative to certain types of entering firms. Sustaining versus disruptive technologies. Most new technologies foster improved product performance. I call these sustaining technologies. Some sustaining technologies can be discontinuous or radical in character, while others are of an incremental nature. What all sustaining technologies have in common is that they improve the performance of established products, along the dimensions of performance that mainstream customers in major markets have historically valued. Most technological advances in a given industry are sustaining in character. An important finding revealed in this book is that rarely have even the most radically difficult sustaining technologies precipitated the failure of leading firms. Occasionally, however, disruptive technologies emerge, innovations that result in worse product performance, at least in the near term. Ironically, in each of the instances studied in this book, it was disruptive technology that precipitated the leading firm's failure. Disruptive technologies bring to a market a very different value proposition than had been available previously. Generally, disruptive technologies underperform established products in mainstream markets, but they have other features that a few fringe and generally new customers value. Products based on disruptive technologies are typically cheaper, simpler, smaller, and frequently more convenient to use. There are many examples, in addition to the personal desktop computer and discount retailing examples cited above. Small off-road motorcycles introduced in North America and Europe by Honda, Kawasaki, and Yamaha were disruptive technologies relative to the powerful over-the-road cycles made by Harley-Davidson and BMW. Transistors were disruptive technologies relative to vacuum tubes. Health maintenance organizations were disruptive technologies to conventional health insurers. In the near future, Internet appliances may become disruptive technologies to suppliers of personal computer hardware and software. Trajectories of market need versus technology improvement. The second element of the failure framework, the observation that technologies can progress faster than market demand, means that in their efforts to provide better products than their competitors and earn higher prices and margins, suppliers often overshoot their market. They give customers more than they need or ultimately are willing to pay for. And more importantly, it means that disruptive technologies that may underperform today, relative to what users in the market demand, may be fully performance competitive in that same market tomorrow. Many who once needed mainframe computers for their data processing requirements, for example, no longer need or buy mainframes. Mainframe performance has surpassed the requirements of many original customers, who today find that much of what they need to do can be done on desktop machines linked to file servers. In other words, the needs of many computer users have increased more slowly than the rate of improvement provided by computer designers. Similarly, many shoppers who in 1965 felt they had to shop at department stores to be assured of quality and selection now satisfy those needs quite well at Target and Walmart. Disruptive technologies versus rational investments. The last element of the failure framework, the conclusion by established companies that investing aggressively in disruptive technologies is not a rational financial decision for them to make, has three bases. First, disruptive products are simpler and cheaper. They generally promise lower margins, not greater profits.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?